Hello everyone, welcome back. This is the series where I talk about myself and my life in music. Today I'll be telling you about some of the bigger musical revelations I've had along the way. If you're a musician yourself, maybe you'll find this stuff useful, and if not, maybe you just enjoy a good story. But you know those big aha moments where everything suddenly comes into focus? My college roommate used to have these all the time. He'd barge into the room after a drum lesson and say something like, "Dude, I just had the biggest realization. I've been drumming wrong this entire time." He was a very excitable fellow, and this happened on a weekly basis. You may not know this, but don't let the high energy persona that I put on for YouTube fool you. I'm actually pretty relaxed in everyday life, and it takes a lot for me to get excited, but there have been some important things I figured out along the way that have led me to where I am now. One of the early revelations that I had is that when it comes to music, there is no magic. When I was younger, I would hear something that my favorite artist would play, and it would seem so beyond anything that I could see myself doing that it seemed like magic. A perfect example would be that quick phrase at the end of the intro of Stevie Ray Vaughan's Mary Had a Little Lamb. If I remember correctly, it goes like this. I heard this tune when I was 15 or so, 3 years into my guitar playing, and that lick in particular just sounded too fast. It sounded like nothing else I'd ever heard before, and it seemed like something that I would never be able to do. My first thought was to just hang up the guitar for something easier, like the bass. No offense, bassists, I was 15 at the time, I didn't know any better. But after a bit of thought, I figured, okay, I'll give this a shot, and so I went to my guitar teacher and asked him if he had any explanation for this wizardry. He showed me that it's really just a descending pentatonic lick with a blues note in it. And then it ends by hitting the E7 chord. And lo and behold, this mystical lick was just a scale that I already knew, as well as a chord shape that I was already somewhat familiar with. It took a while to get this lick up to speed, but realizing that anything can be demystified with a bit of work is something that has stuck with me through the years. It was also in these early years that I had the revelation that natural talent only goes so far. I started playing guitar at the same time as a couple other of my friends, and at first I found it really frustrating that they were able to do a lot of things much quicker and easier than I was. I'd go hang out with a buddy and he'd show me all these riffs that he'd more or less figured out himself, which was something I definitely couldn't do at this point. I suspected that he was having an easier time because he'd taken piano lessons when he was young, whereas for me, guitar was the first instrument I put any real effort into. I certainly wasn't naturally gifted in the way that some are. The proof was my grade school music classes, doing horribly on recorder tests, and struggling with choir were things that were all too real to a young Sammy G. But unlike these other endeavors, I actually really wanted to become good at guitar. So I just started practicing more and more. When my pals would be riding bikes, I'd be at home working on my power chords and stuff like that. And before long, I could do things that my more gifted friends couldn't. Fast forward to college, and once again, I was surrounded by guitarists who were better than me, but since I'd been through this before, I knew that with hard work and a strict practice regimen, I could keep up with my peers. I was definitely never the best, but I got a lot out of my schooling and really enjoyed it. Had I not had the revelation that hard work can usually make up for any lack of natural talent at an early age, I probably would have gotten overwhelmed when I went to music school and went a different direction in life. In fact, I saw many of my peers who started at the same time as me go through this and drop out soon after. The next revelation that I'll tell you about today was the realization that sometimes you just need to take a break from practicing guitar and play. I've talked about this before, but after I graduated high school, I went to university for a year taking business classes. I quickly realized that I hated this, dropped out, and with nothing better to do, I went to Australia and backpacked around for 6 months. Leading up to this point, I had practiced pretty regularly for the bulk of my teen years. It wasn't the strict regimented practicing that I did when I went to college, but it was still an active effort to improve on my instrument. When I went down under, I took a travel acoustic guitar with me. I played it whenever I felt like it. I jammed with fellow travelers and wrote music whenever the urge struck. Whenever I did this, it was purely for the enjoyment of it, which was extremely reinvigorating. It was during this time that I fell deeper in love with music and ultimately decided that I wanted to devote my career to it. I think it was this elongated practice break that made it possible for me to go home, feel fresh and energized, and have the motivation to go and take on a degree in music. See, these breaks allow all the stuff that you've been working on to sink in so that they come out naturally in your playing. And you might be surprised to find out that when you do come back to practicing after the break, all this stuff seems clearer than it was before. Moving on is something that hit me after the second year of my music degree. The revelation that you don't need to be the best guitarist to be a great one. I was about halfway through my studies, and the thought that I was going to need to generate an income with all the stuff that I'd been learning was becoming more and more of a reality. There were some of my peers with all the natural talent in the world who practiced just as hard as I did, and I didn't know how I could compete for the limited work in the music industry with musicians of this caliber. It got me into a bit of a funk, and I started thinking about what it was I liked so much about my favorite guitarists, musicians like John Scofield, Bill Frisell, Derek Trucks. I remember lying in my dorm and thinking that if you took my favorite guitarists and put them into the Guitar Olympics with a bunch of other highly skilled musicians, well, they probably wouldn't win. None of my favorites were the fastest in the world. None of them were pushing the boundaries of theory. None of them were making inhuman finger stretches to play some crazy chords. What they did have in common was the fact that they all had a very distinct voice. They were the best in the world at being themselves. And when I realized this, I decided that I wasn't going to spend my time trying to become the next whoever. Instead, I would spend my time trying to find a sound that was true and unique to me. My musical journey from then on was defined by this mindset, and no longer comparing myself to others took a lot of weight off my shoulders, and it was just more enjoyable. I was playing what I wanted to play, only playing things that I liked, and I let that shape my sound. I should know that this was a very good point in my life to have this revelation. I had put a lot of work into getting the fundamentals of music down so that I could start developing an artistic vision. I don't think I would have gotten to that point had I not spent a lot of time practicing music that I wasn't passionate about. That music being jazz. My last revelation for today is one that I had after college. Skill alone rarely leads to success. After college, I started gigging a lot more, especially in the country world. And in those circles, there were talks of this chicken-picking phenom who a lot of the musicians that I was working with had hired at one point or another. I heard some of his playing. It was exceptional. He could shred me under the table, no question about it. I remember bringing this up to a friend of mine. I said something like, how are we getting all these gigs when this other prodigy guitarist isn't? He said something like, well, that guy's an amazing player, but he's lacking in every other facet. He was a tough guy to be around, he was prone to mood swings, wasn't reliable, that type of thing. And it's one thing to get that kind of guy out to a recording here or there, but to take him on the road would have required quite a bit of babysitting that nobody wanted to do. And think about it this way, your average bar goer who's been drinking Bud Lights all night at some tiny little place in rural BC isn't going to be able to tell the difference between a jaw-dropping guitar solo and one that's highly competent. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Some of the bigger revelations that I've had in my musical journey. If you want to share one of your realizations with me, please let me know in the comment section. I always try to read as many of those as possible. Thank you all so much for watching. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. If you want to check out another video like this one, you can hit that link up there. And if you want to check out some of that sweet Sammy G merch, you can find that over at www.shopsamuraiguitarist.com. Until next time, I'm Samurai Guitarist, and I will see you again soon.